In the world of street photography, there's a fascinating and sometimes contentious divide between two major schools of thought: the fine art approach and the documentary candid approach. This split in approach has created ongoing debates about authenticity, artistic merit, and what true street photography really means. It's a split in the genre that everyone knows about, but not a lot of people really want to talk about it. Or if they do talk about it, it comes off in a very, passive-aggressive way, or sometimes a very aggressive way. And so sometimes it feels like there's this weird tension between the two sides, where photographers are silently judging each other for their approaches without having, an open dialogue about their different philosophies. But maybe understanding these different approaches and perspectives can help bridge the divide and maybe lead us to learn something new that we can apply to our own approach. Ultimately, there's no single right way to approach street photography. Everyone is free to make their own creative rules, but that freedom only extends to our own work. Documentary street photographers often argue that the genre's essence lies in capturing authentic, unmanipulated moments of life. They believe that street photography should be about preserving genuine human moments. Heavy editing or artistic manipulation betrays the documentary nature of the medium, and the focus should be on storytelling and social documentation rather than aesthetic appeal. On the other side, fine art street photographers contend that street photography can be a form of artistic expression beyond mere documentation. Composition, light, and form are equally important as the subject matter, and post-processing and artistic interpretation are valid tools in creating meaningful work. And of course, there's people who lie somewhere in between both of those approaches. I personally would like to think I'm one of those people, and maybe you are too. So this tension between these two approaches, it comes from some fundamental disagreements about authenticity versus artistic license, the role of post-processing in street photography, and whether street photography should prioritize documentation or artistic expression. This represents one of the core philosophical debates in street photography. Documentary photographers argue that the moment should be completely candid and unaltered, reflecting the reality as it happened. They view any artistic manipulation as compromising the integrity of the photograph. Fine art photographers, on the other hand, counter that all photography inherently involves artistic choices. From framing to timing to equipment selection, they argue that further artistic interpretation through editing is simply an extension of the creative process. Now we see this clash of opinions pop up in conversations about whether or not photographers should interact with their subjects, or whether or not a photographer should crop or remove elements from a photo. For instance, some documentary photographers criticize the practice of asking strangers to pose or recreate moments that they saw happen. They argue that produces inauthentic, staged images. Yet others point to the works of renowned photographer Vivian Maier, who occasionally interacted with her subjects while still creating genuine, historically significant photographs. And famous documentary photographers such as Joel Meyerowitz and Alex Webb, they interacted with a lot of the subjects they photographed, mostly as a means to, break the ice between photographer and subject. Now, the cropping debate offers another clear example of this divide. Henri Cartier-Bresson, often considered the father of street photography, was outspoken about not cropping images. If you start cutting or cropping a good photograph, it means death to the geometrically correct interplay of proportions. Besides, it very rarely happens that a photograph, which was feebly composed, can be saved by reconstruction of its composition under the darkrooms enlarger. The integrity of vision is no longer there. But even Bresson would occasionally crop his photos. This apparent contradiction highlights a key point. Even the biggest proponents for pure documentary work found it necessary to still make some artistic compromises. The reality is that every photograph, no matter how candid or unmanipulated, involves some degree of artistic choice, starting with the simple act of choosing what you're going to include in the frame and what you're going to leave out. These nuances in the documentary approach show how the line between pure documentation and artistic interpretation has always been somewhat blurry. Post-processing has become one of the most debated aspects of modern street photography. Documentary purists advocate for minimal editing, typically just basic exposure and contrast adjustments, to preserve a photograph's authenticity. They believe that heavy editing can misrepresent reality and breach that trust between the photographer and the viewer. Fine art photographers, on the other hand, embrace post-processing as part of the creative process. They maintain that techniques such as dramatic black and white conversions, selective color adjustments, and even composite images can convey some kind of story, even when altering its literal appearance. Now, this debate has definitely intensified in recent years because of new technologies, specifically AI being incorporated into all of our editing softwares. This new technology brings some critical questions. Is removing something from an image, even if it's a small piece of trash on the ground, is that a breach of authenticity? Is using generative fill and adding something to an image to improve the composition compromising the integrity? And should photographers disclose when they make these edits? The split in approach to post-processing isn't something new because of the digital age, though. Consider the stark contrast between two respected photographers. The minimal adjustments of photographers like Meyerowitz, who aim to preserve the natural look of his scenes, versus the dramatic editing style of, say, Fan Ho, who used darkroom techniques to create high-contrast, artistic interpretations of street scenes. Both of these photographers are highly regarded as some of the most influential photographers to ever live. And in my view, both exemplify what street photography can be. If you're anything like me, you've probably put off a lot of projects over the holidays. You know, like maybe update your website. But a task like that isn't so daunting as it sounds when you use Squarespace, today's sponsor. I've been using Squarespace to run my own professional website for my photography for over 6 years, and I've stuck with them so long because of how seamless it is to use. I just recently gave my website a refreshed look, and it was super easy to do all of that with Squarespace's design tools. So maybe this is your time to get started yourself with Squarespace. You can visit squarespace.com/Faisal and use the code Faisal to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Should street photography prioritize documentation or artistic expression? The prioritization debate touches on the fundamental purpose of street photography itself. Those who favor documentation argue that street photography's primary value lies in the ability to preserve historical moments and social realities for future generations. They see themselves as visual historians capturing the zeitgeist of the time that they live in. Artistic-focused photographers counter that emotional impact and the visual poetry can communicate deeper truths about the human experience than strictly documentary approaches. They argue that by elevating street scenes through artistic interpretation, they can create more meaningful connections with the viewer and transcend mere documentation. This tension manifests itself in discussions about what makes a successful street photograph. Documentary photographers might prioritize capturing decisive moments and clear storytelling, while fine art photographers might focus on the aesthetic elements like composition, light, and the mood. The challenge lies in finding ways to respect both perspectives and not see them as mutually exclusive. The beauty of street photography, in my opinion, lies in its diversity of expression. Each approach offers unique insights into the human experience. Perhaps the real question isn't which approach is correct, but rather how these different approaches can enrich our understanding of street photography as a whole. Art, as it has always been, is subjective. Ultimately, I believe you should do what resonates with you. If your intention is to express yourself through art, use it as a medium. If you're a documentary photographer, strive for authenticity in your approach. But once your photography is shared with the world, viewers will interpret it through their own perspective. And that's the essence of art. Each individual's unique perception adds another layer of depth to the work.